Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact took the world by storm upon release, and for a mobile game, or even a game in general, it's extremely complicated with a lot of depth. Whether it's the music, environments, characters, stories, or more, they all have something in common within this heavily thought out world: immersion. I'm not analysing characters and the lore, but rather I'm analysing how it immerses you. Not from a professional standpoint or anything, but rather from the standpoint of someone who was also immersed. I'm not discussing how people get immersed in the damage numbers, by the way. This will be split into 5 main sections and then a conclusion, by the way. First, I'll discuss Dragon Spine, then Leeway, Inazuma, Sumeru, and some other things worth bringing up. Finally, I'll bring up the inspirations charged from this heavy dose of immersiveness, and I'll conclude as I said. Whether it's the charming mountains of Leeway, the variety of Sumeru, or the deep writing of the Wanderer, it'll all be brought up from this point onward. Here we go, traveller. The world of Teyvat is split up into 7 individual and extremely unique nations, that being Mondstadt, Leeway, Inazuma, Sumeru, Fontaine, Natlan, and Snezhnaya. However, we only have up to Fontaine at the point of this video. It is important to mention the atmospheres these areas create is largely music involved, so expect analysis on that, the place itself, and gameplay. I'll try to split them up as best I can just for you guys. Beginning with the earliest chronological one, let's talk about Dragonspine. A lot of people despise this place for the cold mechanics, and I get that. Though personally, it makes it feel really interesting and intimidating when you're a new player exploring the nearby locations, and shows you just how crazy this map can truly get. While Mondstadt is probably the most generic of the nations, Dragonspine is very upfront and filled to the brim with charm. Every square mile is snow, filled with ice and fatui, which are otherwise quite rare in other parts of Mondstadt. You feel rewarded for managing to squeeze your way into such a dangerous location, lighting up torches and feeling like you've got control of your environment to some extent. A real exploration. To me, the first journey to the peak of the mountain is like no other, as if it's a domain in the open world. Figuring out there's a massive cave that helps you reach the peak, opening up the domain at the top, or fighting the many different monsters waiting for you. On top of all these things, the music is actually beautiful. In fact, I'm listening to it as I'm saying this. Always been some of the best tracks to me in the soundtrack, my favourites being things like Finale of the Snow Tomb, or Snowberry Tales. All being heterophonic, which means all instruments lay together smoothly. Dragonspine has always seemed like a whole different nation to me, and finding other Explorer NPCs trying to make their way in only adds to this. The Crimson Tree and tier mechanic gives this even more depth, similar to how other nations' extensions handle their mechanics. Finding them in this heavily dangerous environment, slowly upgrading your gear and conquering the elements, and melting the many chunks of ice to find chests is an unbeatable feeling to me. Genshin's heavy series of minigames, chests, puzzles, and more add to everything, but especially here. Otherwise it would be unbearable. It might be clear to see that I really love Dragonspine, so yeah. I also like how it breaks off to an ocean on one side, yet is a small river on the other. The sheer cold mechanic adds to it, of course, feeling cold, paired with the heavy winds at the top and foggy surroundings. Leeway and Mondstadt are all very sunny and happy, which is the opposite of this area. I think I've said enough about Dragonspine, and I hope it's changed your mind at least a little bit if you didn't like it. For a quick summary, the sheer cold mechanic helps you feel like you're overcoming the elements over time, which isn't paralleled anywhere else in the world, helps make the place feel colder, and just gives it a unique vibe. The side quests add depth and give more to explore at a point of the game where side quests seem appealing as you're only just starting out. The Crimson stuff adds an otherworldly reward system that of course becomes more average in Inazuma and above. The fog, heavy winds, loads of snow and snowy hilly trails with Fatui, the torches, and Journey to the Peak all come together as the cherry on top. Before we go to Leeway though, I do want to say, some people like to skip Dragonspine till far later where they desire more rewards, so this might not apply to you. I'm sorry about that if so. But I still find it really damn immersive, I'm gonna just be for real. Anyway, now we can go to Leeway. At this point in the game, the world has become somewhat repetitive and calm, excluding Dragonspine. Now, before I talk chronologically, I want to talk about a big point of immersion to me. The open world is of course a contributing factor, but there's something I don't see many people mention, the lack of barriers. Even Inazuma is accessible if you try hard enough, because the world of Teyvat is real. It doesn't have any artificial barriers, but simply a vast land to explore. I mean, unless you want to count the whole Paimon barrier thing, but anyway... The reason I bring this up now is because you can just casually walk to Leeway, which I did without even understanding how nations worked. The world is so fun to explore that I zoned out, going south to try to discover the Statue of the Seven, and as I pressed it and looked at the map, it didn't say Mondstadt, but rather Leeway. That's when I got excited. There was a lot of progression to be made throughout the world. Leeway is a vibrant yellow, orange, more autumn-like colour with amazing Chinese-inspired architecture to be found everywhere. New core lapis can be found with interesting materials containing a variety of characters, animals, and slimes. Massive peaks that I found extremely fun to climb are also everywhere. There's a lot of world building, stating this were spears thrown by Rex Lapis during the Archon War, and they can hurt as much as a spear when you fall off. Beautiful fields of crops, many little villages, and just so much more to explore can overwhelm you when you commit yourself to exploring the area, but I haven't mentioned the main attraction, to me, which is the music. Leeway's music is the most cheery of all of them, incorporating a large variety of instruments typically at high pitches. Some tracks are driven by piano, which every nation has in common. This helps emphasize the different emotions in different tracks, and Leeway is extremely heterophonic. The best track to show this is the track called Leeway. If you're curious what heterophonic means, it means all the layers are united. The first two nations are, as I said, Paradise. Leeway and Mondstadt are both extremely similar, though Leeway takes the cake. Child's betrayal, goofing off with the Zhongli, or simply spending time looking off the port is all enjoyable. The citizens thrive here, and Leeway is probably the least troubled nation during the story, at least so far. There is the chasm, which is extremely dark, but it is more intimidating than tragic. Jade's sacrifice did not faze me at all. Inazuma, at the time, which is my time, funny enough, was the first real exposition to the dark side of Genshin, because the chasm wasn't out yet. The music is slow, and while it may be beautiful in some or most areas, the constant thundering, faded strips of nature, and the constant barracks, bridges, and evidence of battle contaminate it. It's anything but eternal and completely different to the nations prior. While we were used to vibrance and quick-paced fun, Inazuma has slower quests, stronger enemies, and a lot more mechanics to wrap your head around. It's alien. A big piece of why I feel this is because it's completely unique geographically. While Fontaine comes close, Inazuma is a collection of islands in a vast ocean. While there is exploration, it's split up into chunks and you're isolated by the borders of each island, not even being able to leave the first one for a while. This does help as discovering a new island instead of a new chunk of land feels significantly different, but yeah, it might be the biggest nation, but also the smallest. Now, don't get me started on the story as well. You're under constant pressure by the Archon, once again similar to Fontaine, and even outside of the story, the Archon skews certain areas and nature against you till later on. It constantly reminds you that you're not welcome here, which is not how any other nation feels in this game, and I imagine it'll stay that way till Snezhnaya. Also, I've got to say, while every nation has some consistency in their music, after Inazuma, it's really reinforced. Inazuma and Sumeru especially use a lot of the same instruments for their tracks, which is funny considering how inconsistent their maps themselves actually are. The tracks can be very slow sometimes, as if the Archon is trying to slow down change for that illusion of eternity, which I like the detail of. There really is a divine beauty in everything Inazuma, because she has incorporated herself so extremely into everything to do with it. Inazuma is so heavily controlled by the Raiden Shogun and it shows. If I had to summarize the vibe of Inazuma, it's hostile. Much like the Archon in her Archon quests, the constant vibe of war really does take over the nation like a storm, and I like and dislike that. It definitely immersed me in this tragedy, and it just shocks me how effectively the people over at Hoyoverse can create such awesome vibes and such extreme immersion. Let's head to Sumeru for a look at that now. Sumeru is one I haven't actually played through, but rather I watched all the cutscenes and visited it a few times when I did have direct access to the game, which I might be getting back soon. I also love the tracks from it, especially the two Avidya Forest themes being Vagrant Wandering and Flickering Shadows of Trees. Tighnari and Collei are great, and this is something Sumeru does very well. Chapters. Avidya Forest, Port Ormos, Caravan Rebat, the desert, you name it. It always feels different. Sumeru City is completely different from Avidya Forest, and the culture is a big focus of Sumeru. The variety of locations, consistent and inconsistent tracks, just so many things are so immersive. Dragonspine is uniquely cold and tragic, Leeway is warm, lively and happy, and Inazuma is hostile. though Sumeru's immersion comes from a variety as it mirrors the real world. If you live in a city of some sort, you may subconsciously split two areas of it up if you enjoy going for walks or something, and Sumeru captures that. Everything feels like the same but completely different nations simultaneously. So variety is its greatest strength. You come from the piano-driven, quiet forests to the lively, instrumental city and then wild sands of the desert with plenty of amazing tracks. It's hot there, but not comfortably. In fact, it only becomes less comfortable the further you travel into the nation, the more you learn of its cultures. The further you need the culture of Gords, King Deshret, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, Lesser Lord Kusanali, or even the God of Arcane Wisdom. It all causes conflict, and it reinforces that prediction that we'll be overthrowing the Gords at the end of the game. I'm rambling a little, but I hope you're still present. The Withering Zones are also a nice touch, as they simply add more to do and split the forest and desert apart further. You become truly immersed in the worlds presented throughout Genshin Impact. Sumeru pretty much creates the same vibe that the map as a whole creates with different sections, and that is definitely immersive, with the variety of soundtracks. There's 2 whole albums for Sumeru, in fact. Besides specific nations or locations, it's worth bringing up some final things, like Fatui Harbingers. Whether it's their motif in music, the connection between them all, or how they all hail from different nations, or even where you find them and their connection to the story, they're integral. The whole of the Fatui already is, but this is pretty interesting as well. Currently, we know of all 11 Fatui Harbingers, but we've only properly seen Child, Scaramouche, Dottore, La Signora, and soon to be Arlecchino, as 4.1 is soon to come out. All of these characters that have themes so far include the Fatui Harbinger motif and a load of singing, which is pretty uncommon. These Harbingers already link back to the nations they're introduced in, as when I see Child, I think of Wei and his dynamics with Zhongli and more. When I see Scaramouche, I think of Inazuma, and then to Wanderer, which makes me think of Sumeru. The point I'm trying to make is it creates immersion by having these other characters come in at different times and nations, adding a mutual depth between them all. You aren't the only one with goals, ambitions, and plans to travel. There's just realism to it. It's the same as giving an antagonist the two-faced depth, not being 2D but rather 3D. Of course, these harbingers add more complexity to the antagonism shown in each chapter, build up to the climax and more. Anyway, I just want to dedicate a little bit of time to the immense amount of chests, trials, side quests, Easter eggs, and more. Whether it's an extremely rare hilichurl, enough chests and trials to keep you entertained exploring for 4 hours straight in only one area, or side quests with actually decently written stories. I remember the first time I played Genshin, I took it quite slow because even though I downloaded it for somebody else, I found myself invested. I enjoyed the stories, enjoyed exploration, and hardly understood artifact or character upgrading. I still hardly understand why people are so crazy over artifacts. My point is, if you push back the gacha a little, you can really appreciate Genshin's immersive beauty. I lost my phone that I played the game on, but got a new, much worse phone a year from then and got Genshin on that instead. I restarted, and while I still enjoyed exploring, the hustle and bustle of upgrading my characters or trying to get Child did intrude a little. Doing commissions did as well. If you find yourself stressed out by this massive game, just take a moment and relax. Why care about being behind when there are tons of new players starting every day that are far more behind than you'll ever be? There's no need to stress. Look at the variety of battle themes for both nations, but sections of those nations. For example, look at the variety of battle themes for both nations, but sections of those nations coming in groups of 3. Domains even have their own battle themes, like WoW. The variety of themes almost always gives each battle you fight its own personality of sorts in your memory, which is extremely cinematic in a way. Each boss has their own theme or up to 3, and this just proves how important their applications of these soundtracks are too. The Genshin menu adapts to current time of your device, having morning, midday, afternoon, and nighttime variants, I think. My point is, these both immerse yourself by merging the real world with Genshin, and on top of that, a variety of themes are used for these different times. The authenticity of these themes are extremely present as they were created for the purpose of being used overall, until the composer, Yu Peng Chen, decided to use both the old and the new versions of the theme together for different times. This applies similarly in the game itself as well, most areas having unique themes most of the time, and to top it off, having different covers or remixes of those themes. For nighttime and daytime. Melodies are almost never used only once in Genshin, and this helps that element of the soundtrack shine. Genshin is beautiful, and it's important to pay attention to that fact. Enjoy that. Enjoy finding chests, mining a bunch of random ores for random purposes, grabbing all the materials you can, finding, discovering. grabbing all the materials you can find, discovering new lands, and investing yourself in the environment crafted by Horioverse. Anyway, there's 2 more sections to go. Sorry to make this sound like an early conclusion. Let's talk about other people who have turned their immersion into creations as well. Consider this an extra section. If you don't like it, you can skip to the timestamp on screen. It's just the outro of this video. In this part, I just want to shed some light on what the immersion has created and bring up a few names. Farabi Hassan Music, for example, has made a name for themselves in the Genshin community, creating a boatload of absolute bangers. These include fan-made themes for future harbingers, future nations, and a few more random Genshin themes, and more. Overall, an amazing creator. There's also Sayori, which hasn't been too active recently, but seems to be making some real bangers. Fan-made nation themes, boss themes, and more. I can see a pattern now. On top of that, there's Heosman, which is making the previously mentioned stuff alongside a few covers of existing themes. Straight bangers from this person as well. Memorial's Sandrone battle theme is immaculate and possibly my favourite fan-made Genshin theme, and well, I could go on for a while. My point is, Yu Peng Chen, alongside the other composers such as Zach Huang from the Dragonspine album, have created what feels like a generation of music composers and producers. And a big part of why it is the immersion Genshin creates. It's inspiring, and you can literally put these tracks over things happening in real life, to be honest. Also, if you love the immersion of the music, specifically, you can check these guys out. Alright, outro time. Genshin Impact sure is beautiful, though I went on that tangent in Chapter 5. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe with notifications, and maybe even share. If there's any mistakes I made or things I could work on, tell me. On top of that, tell me how you feel about the world of Genshin Impact, and should I make other videos? I'm considering one about the dynamic between Fontaine and Mondstadt, but I'd like to see how many people actually want this type of content first. Alright, it's time for this video to end. Goodbye to anybody who's made it this far, and have a good morning, day, afternoon, or night. I've got no way of knowing what time it is for you.